welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Another episode of the Research Works podcast. It's our favourite time of the week again.
Always. Always.
We're so excited to have you join us today, and we feel very privileged because we have another returning guest to the show.
I love returning guests.
It's cool. So, to talk about all things exercise and health communication, we have Professor Ben Jackson from the University of Western Australia and Telethon Kids Institute. Welcome back, Ben.
Hello, both. I was starting to feel like maybe the call was never going to come. I've seen a few folks come back, and I thought, oh, maybe I didn't do a good enough job the first time. So I'm feeling delighted that you've let me back in. Don't call us, we'll call you.
Yeah. Well, it's so lovely to have you back again. And, the last episode that we had was so useful in covering the topic of messaging and communication and health. And it's so important because relational skills is kind of what we do every single day. You don't just carry out interventions just as it is in a vacuum. There are people that we need to interact with. And so we were just really excited to talk to you more about science behind a lot of that today, because there is science behind communication.
Yeah, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And there's a way of hopefully doing it well and lots of ways of doing it badly. So looking forward to talking about a few of those.
Very excited.
Me too. All right. Before we get stuck into that, though, and there is lots that we want to cover with Ben today, we thought we would do a little refresher for our long-time listeners who might have already listened to Ben's first episode on the podcast. But for those who are newer to the podcast, Ben has a shared appointment between Telethon Kids Institute and the University of Western Australia. At Telethon Kids, Ben's the head of the Institute's Brain and Behaviour Research Focus Area. And at UWA, he's a professor in the School of Human Sciences. Ben's research and community programming activity within the Psychology of Active Healthy Living group, or the PAL group, is driven by a focus on listening to community priorities and designing programs that tackle the health challenges that really matter. Ben has produced over 170 publications, and his work with the PAL group has been supported with funding from agencies that include the NH&MRC, the ARC, Healthway, Lottery West and Sport Australia. Ben is a deputy editor for Stress and Health and serves on the editorial board of four other well-known journals in the field of health psychology and health promotion. He's an adjunct professor at James Cook University and sits on advisory committees for Football West, Healthway, Exercise and Sport Science Australia, NHMRC, ARC and the International Olympic Committee.
Oh my God, that is so cool.
Oh, I do all of it badly. So.
Such a lie. It's always, that's an amazing bio. It always feels a little bit uncomfortable when someone's talking about you that way, doesn't it?
I'll never get used to it.
But it's that just speaks to the breadth of the skills that you do have. And what an honour.
You're both too kind. Thank you.
And the knowledge that you have that you're going to share with us all today.
Yeah,
Let's hope.
That's right.
So, Ben, you are familiar with the podcast and its format, and you know that we like to ask people an icebreaker question.
I do.
And I thought, given that we are touching on things that relate to physical activity and sport and exercise, that we might talk about what your favourite sporting moment is and why. And we'll talk about it too.
But guess first, for sure.
The accent will give away that as an English person, we haven't got too many great sporting moments. In fact, we're recording this at the time of the Women's Soccer World Cup. Actually, the night after England have just beaten Australia in the semi-final. So perhaps my greatest sporting moment is coming on Sunday when they play Spain in the final. and I'll listen back to this at some point in the future and probably hate that I said that after Spain wins 6-0. If you'll indulge me, I think one of the most significant sporting moments for me was actually one that I was playing in. I tried. I ran around and tried to play soccer and cricket as a kid, and we were lucky enough to go to France in probably year 9 or 10. We were a representative team going out and playing over there, and it was the big deal. In my head, it was the big deal, and I had to play well. And I was lucky enough to be the captain of this team, so it felt like it was on me to set the tone. And our first match was against a French team, and this small French striker, I was a centre back. This small French striker, after the whistle came and ran up against me. I thought, okay, I've got this guy. And the first thing that he did was spit in my face, and I still feel the same. I have the same reaction now. I had the reaction that you just had, Dana, and I played awfully because I spent the whole time wanting to kick the guy, and it was really smart on his part. And he scored a couple of goals that day, and who knows what he went on to do, But I credit that as the moment that I kind of got interested in psychology and what happens in your brain, because I completely screwed it up that day. Wow. So that's probably my most significant sporting moment, I think.
Oh, I love where you took that. That is actually really cool to think about how, that your experiences can really shape where you go to, and you don't realize it happens at the time, but that would have been so distressing.
You can tell I still get mad about it.
Yeah. But I wonder where he is and where is he?
I should have kicked him harder.
I'd just like to acknowledge what a tall man you are, and
that's
how difficult it must have been to actually do that.
Yeah, were you already really tall?
It was a good shot. Yeah, I would have been over 6 foot at the time. So, it was a it got me right in the cheek.
I mean, was he shorty or was he quite
was very short, yeah.
Oh, so he actually projectiled.
Oh, he did, yeah, right.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
he's had practice.
He was as good a shot in soccer as he was with his spitting.
Oh,
yeah, that's me.
I feel like you've done it all now. Yeah. Wow. Well,
what about you, Dana?
So I am one that I don't enjoy watching sport because I get too emotionally invested. I get so distressed. I'll start watching something and I'm convinced because I'm watching it, the team I'm going for is going downhill. So I'll pretend I'm not watching. I'll go on my phone instead and pretend I'm doing something else, but I'm really looking. Or I'll follow the score online. Yeah. I can't handle the emotion of it. And when it comes to Football World Cup, my husband is big into football. He's a proud Dutchman. So anything to do with Dutch football is, as anyone might know, is a tragedy. Like they're great at what they do, but man, they fall short and I feel it.
Like the English.
Like the English, I know. They won one World Cup. It was a long time ago and they're just trying to come back again, but the women might beat the men to it, which would be
great,
amazing.
wouldn't it?
It would be so cool. So I don't have those moments, but I have one sporting moment for myself. So I don't play team sports. I'm just not particularly good. Like I can, I'll exercise, I'll run, I do things on my own. I know my strengths. But one time in year 9, same time, it's amazing how that does shape you. Formative. I joined the field hockey team because they were just really short and they just needed someone that could probably just be a body, really. So I was there. We went to some sort of sports carnival championship thing and we were doing really well. Like we were beating all the teams and we made it to the final. And so I've never been in a sporting final before in my life. And so my parents for the first time thought, oh, wow, Dana's actually doing something in a sporting field. We're going to go watch the final. We were up against, obviously, the other finalists who were spectacularly good. I found out later they're the high school that specialises in field hockey in Perth.
Yeah.
And I remember from the first moment as what I thought was tricks where they could just aim the ball and actually direct it where they wanted to, I was like, we're in trouble. We lost 10-0. And I was like, yeah, that's me done. I just really don't think this is for me.
Team sport career over.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I'm okay with it. Yeah. I just find it too much. Yeah. But that was my big sporting moment.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't know you played field hockey.
Oh, no, I don't.
Well, you did. Briefly.
Got to a final.
Yeah,
I got to a final. Yeah,
that's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, my parents were, I think they felt like they might have wasted their time that day. So we never really talk about it.
Oh, okay. There's 2 that come to mind. None of them involve me, which is good because my sporting career was, not glittering, shall we say. The first one is the 2018 AFL Grand Final because I was very heavily pregnant at the time.
Oh.
And my team was playing in the Grand Final, the West Coast Eagles against Collingwood. And it was a very close match.
Yes.
And Dom Sheed kicked a goal very late in the last quarter for the Eagles to win it for the Eagles. And I jumped around a lot, and my mum told me that I had to go sit in a chair because she was worried that I was going to give birth. But I've never been as happy. It was it was euphoric. It was, and I say that
is
having
cool,
given
though.
birth kind of a couple of weeks later. But no, that was very happy too. But
So you
the
were
Eagles
heavily
winning
pregnant at the time.
Yes, yeah. The Eagles winning the grand final was just
that is
everything.
really cool.
And
that is
then
really cool.
I think the only thing that's topped that is the Matildas, the Australian women's football team, beating France on those penalty kicks in the quarterfinals.
Oh, that was awful to watch.
Yeah,
oh my
it was so stressful.
Yeah, it was too much.
But it felt like all of Australia stood up at the end of that when they won. We collectively just stood up and screamed and cheered, and it was like so uniting for the country, and it was a pretty special moment, I think.
It was, yeah. And what it's done for sport, women's sport, incredible.
Yeah.
Really incredible.
Yeah.
Good question.
Thank
And
you.
I like how you related it to sport. I feel like that's a good centerpiece for us.
Yeah.
But,
Thanks for giving me the chance to do some therapy about the French guy as well.
We can circle back to that later if you like.
I'd love to know who this person is and what he's done with
Track
his
him
life.
down, yeah.
I'd love to know.
What he's doing now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
All right. Well, let me give you a bit of a rundown about some of the
Yeah.
topics we'll be talking about today. So, how can we use persuasion methods to make people more physically active and improve their activity experiences? Ben and his colleagues have unpacked the answer to this question and others in their book, Persuasion and Communication in Sport, Exercise and Physical Activity. This is the first book to consider the application of persuasion frameworks within activity-related contexts, while summarising major developments related to communication topics in these settings. There are many interesting topics covered in this book, which brings together experts from the field of social, health and sport and exercise psychology to discuss insights into research evidence and the practical implications of this work. There's obviously a lot to cover in this book, but today we're going to talk to Ben about a few major topics that we thought would be relevant to our listeners and give some practical take-home messages to implement into their clinical practice.
Thanks, Dana.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Right.
So, Ben, we obviously talk to experts in research every week about, a particular paper, and we unpack that paper and how they did it and what that means for practice. But you and your colleagues just decided to one up all of that and pull together all of this information into a whole book, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, amazing.
And before we get into the details of some of the topics that were actually covered in the book, I just was really interested to hear from you about the process of putting a book together and how you went about that. How did you persuade people to be involved?
Good question. It was a long and relatively painful process, but a wonderful one. I should say. So we edited the book and had contributions from folks who wrote chapters for us from all over the world, which was amazing. And so we need to, when talking about that project, need to give a whole heap of gratitude to all those people who really made it happen.
Yeah.
I was just the lucky one who got to read all their really cool work and provide a very few comments because it was so nicely put together.
So cool.
So we'd done work for probably the preceding sort of 3 or 4 years around understanding persuasion and communication principles. And we felt like we'd kind of, I described my research interests like I'm like a dog in a park. I see something shiny and I go run over and find out what that is. And I smell something interesting, so I go and find out what that is. And then I hear something in the other corner and I run off over there. And so our research had kind of gone all over the place, but around this sort of common theme, all within the park, around this sort of the persuasion and communication stuff. And we thought, it'd be really nice to feel like we can pull this all together.
Yeah.
And that to us was to have Routledge allow us to put a book together, which they said yes to, thankfully. In getting people to agree, there's actually a chapter in the book on a really cool model of persuasion that folks listening will have seen used almost daily.
Yeah.
There's a really incredible psychologist in the US called Robert Cialdini, who has spent his career working on a model called the 6 weapons of persuasion.
Ooh, weapons.
And it's cool. and it's one of those few psychology topics that is popular in sort of in the mainstream sense, but also has a really substantial evidence base behind it as well. And so those 6 weapons of persuasion were actually probably in play when we were trying to persuade people to get involved in the book.
Yeah,
so
cool.
if you'll let me, I'll be perhaps a tangent, but if you'll let me pursue it. These 6 things. So social proof is one of those. So if we think other people are doing a thing or think we should do a thing, we're more likely to do that thing. Commitment. Once we've said or written down that we'll do something, we're much more likely to follow through with it.
Right.
Authority. We're more likely to do things that those in authority positions ask of us. Some of these are probably more positive and productive than others, right?
Sure.
Scarcity, this idea that we're more likely to chase something if there's not much of it.
Like on booking.com when they say there's only 2 rooms left.
2 rooms left, Someone just booked.
Yeah.
1 room left. Is it true?
And hey, there's 3 days left of this sale.
Yeah.
Go out and buy that car. So it's in that one. Scarcity's in place all the time.
Wow.
Liking, which is a really nice one. We're more likely to do things when folks like us, when we're able to build that rapport and trust. And that's something that I think is a really sort of powerful and productive one. And reciprocity as well, which is the you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So there were probably a few of those things happening. So, because once we got the first couple of people to say yes to write chapters, we could use a bit of social proof and say, hey, so-and-so that we really would love to write this chapter, we've already got these folks involved, and how cool's that? So then there's a little bit of that happening. And I would like to think that maybe they liked us, because it was mainly folks that we know. So there was that element. We certainly weren't using authority, because these are world-leading profs.
Bit of reciprocity.
And maybe, I was going to say, maybe there's a bit of reciprocity in that they've done me that favor, so who knows what asks are going to come back of me down the track. So it was actually kind of a nice application of that model, I think.
Even thinking about that model now, I'm sure everyone's really thinking how that applies. Like, you go into social media already and you can see how, some are used more than others, but how some of those are in play, sometimes for good, sometimes for less so, good things. But,
absolutely,
it influences so much of what we see and how we communicate with people.
Absolutely. And I think some of those could be seen, rightly or wrongly, as sort of the dark arts of persuasion. The things like scarcity, like, hey, do this before you've got no chance left to do it. And authority. Do this because I say you should.
You could turn that around for sure.
But some of them are the ones that I like to try and harness, which are, okay, so if there's this effect of liking, then build a relationship with people before you ask them to go do something, or before you try and work on whatever that goal is that you're going to try and achieve together. Then just build the rapport and build the relationship first. And there's actually some evidence behind that working. And then in a way that is appropriate for the person, the family, whoever it may be, try and get that commitment. Try and get that sort of written, that verbal, that planned out commitment, such that that can then, in a productive and positive way, hold folks to what they want to achieve.
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. And again, you can sort of see how it's all really related. I mean, just as a side, I'm really thinking, I think everyone can probably think of someone they know in their life where you're not friends, not really even an acquaintance, but they're in your address book. And every now and then you get a text from them, you're like, what do they want? You know that there's, it's like, hi, how are you? I'm like, okay. Haven't seen you for a while. There's not that sort of likability comes into there, and you kind of go, well, there's no real relationship. So you're just, it's very transactional, and that never feels
reciprocity
nice.
Because they're coming to you. You're not necessarily, coming to them with anything. It's kind of one-way traffic.
It does. Yeah. And I think it's really relevant. And I think that's why this is so important to talk about, because we communicate every single day, whether it's through words, verbally, whether we're writing, whatever it is that we're doing. And I think as clinicians, researchers, we've learned so much along the way already. And when you have new knowledge, that's great, but you need to be able to communicate it in some sort of way. And we often get questions where you go, well, how do I communicate this with our families? How do I help to direct them and say, actually, the evidence is changing. How about we look at this, but you don't know what maybe the personal attachment might be. And so I kind of think of that term, I don't know if that relates to some of these weapons of influence. I see that it probably could, but one I know I've heard of quite a lot is motivational interviewing. Like it's just how that sort of fits in. Does that kind of fit into a lot of those aspects?
It certainly does. One thing that you just mentioned there, Dana, that got me thinking, sorry, and I will address your question, I promise, is the way that we think about communication. And entirely justifiably, we often come away from our communications and think about how well we said the stuff that we wanted to say. And did we get our message across in the way that we wanted to? I always try my best, and I fail at times, but I always try my best to think less about that and think more about how the other person or people received that. And that's something where our awareness often, it doesn't let us get to that point of, okay, it doesn't really matter whether I said the words precisely as I hoped I'd say them, but was the message received and intended and processed in the way that I hoped it would be by those persons? And yet, sure, you need to be a bit of a mind reader to do that. And you're always guessing. But I think it's a nice way of thinking about difficult communication because it also takes you out of your own head. And it starts you thinking about how the other people who you're speaking with are going to receive the messages. So that's just kind of a general principle that I try and keep in mind in lots of my communication. Motivational interviewing absolutely comes into this. And in fact, there are folks who've spent their career working on motivational interviewing who would tell you it's the key thing in terms of trying to help folks reach goals or attainments or any objective or achievements that they might be trying to pursue. And certainly in a therapy, rehabilitation, behavior change and coaching setting, it's something that is done and talked about a lot because it works. So motivational interviewing at its core is not unrelated to what we just talked about in a sense. It's less about thinking of the problem and the prescription, if we think about it in a therapy sense, and more about the person and the conversation. And the aim is probably to get to the same point. We as practitioners in whatever field we might work in know what a certain person or a certain family, we hope, we know what a certain person or a certain family needs and will benefit most from. And the quick and easy and thoughtless, relatively, way is to say, okay, we've spent our 5, 10, 15 minutes having your consultation. You need to go do this. And that's often well-intentioned. And it's often something that we see. We train folks in accredited exercise physiology in the school that I work in at UWA, and we often see the folks who are early on in their training or their career, the nerves that come with real people are challenging, right? And so the
responsibility of, supporting someone through a program like that.
True.
Absolutely. So what folks do, and again, it's entirely understandable, is they go to the problem, they go to their textbook knowledge and they say, okay, this problem with the knee requires this kind of treatment. This problem with this condition requires this kind of therapy. Here's the therapy. Here's your dose. Here's your prescription. And that can work in many cases. But motivational interviewing is a principle that's based not on that kind of approach. It's based much more on a collaborative sort of conversation. And when people hear that, they think, oh, it's like 6 hours of talking. It's typically, if it's done well, it's not. It might be a few more minutes of consultation and conversation, but it can save an awful lot of time if it means that folks are going to do a better job of whatever it is, the sort of the behavioral pathway that you're trying to set them down. So it often starts with open-ended questions rather than telling as a therapist or a practitioner or a coach. So those open-ended questions that allow people to tell you a bit of their story. How does that feel? Could you describe this to me? And people hopefully start to open up, and maybe you're starting to build the rapport and the liking and other things as a result of that as well. And what we try to do is affirm those experiences. So as people will inevitably, certainly in the areas that we're talking about, and the folks who listen to the podcast, we're talking about areas where people will be having some challenge and some difficulty, not necessarily just with physical things, but with psychological and just a kind of life being tipped upside down as well. So we try to, one of the principles of motivational interviewing, which I like a lot, is affirmation, and this idea of genuinely, that's really key, taking some time to appreciate and try to understand and try to empathize with people, breaks down barriers, and is really valuable and can be done in a sort of a glib, quick, disingenuous way very easily.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people read that.
Yeah.
And so if we are anxious, or if we are thinking about our time and what appointment we've got to get to next, and we rush, that must be awful for you. Anyway, let's move on. It's like people pick up on that, and you might not be able to come back from that. So this idea of really positive, caring affirmation is an important element, because it helps to get the information out and helps people tell their story, which is what we want to hear.
Yeah. And that thing that, might be, that thing they're trying to talk to you about might be a real barrier for you trying to, with them, achieve what you want to out of a program. So if you're not giving that airtime, then you're kind of setting yourself up for a loss, aren't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And good principles of communication are not just provide that affirmation and do it, as best you can, looking in the whites of people's eyes and caring for them, but reflect as well. So, sort of paraphrase. So what I think I'm hearing is this. Am I right in my understanding around this? And that makes people feel understood.
Yeah.
And so if you are doing these things well, you're getting to a point where you would hope through sort of a motivational interviewing based conversation. And when motivational interviewing sounds very complex and kind of scientific, I just think of it as a nice, positive, collaborative conversation.
Genuine conversation.
So if you're doing that, then you're reflecting, you're empathizing, you're asking open questions, you're hearing a lot of the person's story. And what you hope you start to see and uncover in there is what a lot of motivational interviewing folks call change talk. Okay. This idea of, listening out for, I want to, I wish, if only, if he could do this, if she could do that.
Okay.
Those sorts of things are where we spot where folks would like to be, and where we start to see the discrepancy between current state and desired future state.
Right.
And that's where in our heads, if we're kind of trying to practice this motivational interviewing, we go, okay, I just found a piece that we can work on.
Yeah.
And we don't then kick into prescribe and deal with problem and go, okay, I can fix that.
Yeah.
We start to talk to folks about how they would like to address it.
Yeah.
And we try to build confidence around their ability to be able to address it. And that might be developing some plans, thinking about the important reasons that matter to pursue that thing.
Sure.
And most of the time, if you talk to folks, it comes back to things that are really kind of important. It's not financial or holidays, it's family and health and those things that really matter. So people often have their own really strong reasons for those things. So we build around those reasons. We try to understand barriers. We try to build a bit of confidence. And you hope that in doing that, first, you get good at it so you can do it relatively quickly. And second, it keeps people on the path to their desired goal, whatever that might be.
Yeah. I think that eliminates quite a few things in terms of judgment. Sometimes people might not want to come back to talk to you again because they feel like you might judge them and you didn't quite, live up to where we think things were going to be. And I think it's so lovely to actually understand someone before you decide to sort of embark on a journey of what's the most appropriate, I think. That's a big one. And the other part I thought was, it's not going to take 6 hours, but you'd also want to be really thoughtful about if you're making appointments, know not to make 5-10 minute appointments and don't embark on those conversations when they start. If you know you need to run off somewhere, make sure you do airtime so that you can delve in if you need to. Just be proactive about it, I guess. Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is worth mentioning, there's lots and lots of research on this, and motivational interviewing is a field that's at the point where people are reviewing their reviews of work here. So there's a lot of work here.
Yeah.
There was a piece, I shouldn't even try to remember the date, but I think it might have been about 2010, 2011, that showed that it doesn't really matter whether you're trying to do this as somebody who's a first year out currently, just being trained, cutting your teeth in the profession, or whether you're 30 years in and have been, experiencing this forever, it works if you try it. So I would, if it's not rocket science, right?
Yeah.
And good, caring practitioners and therapists will be doing lots of this already, but it's a nice chance just to check in and think, am I doing enough of that? Or have I kind of catch whether folks have slipped accidentally for whatever reason into, I've done a bit too much sort of cold prescription, problem focused thinking and not so much person focused. And just to have a crack at these kind of things, I think is really valuable.
Yeah.
And you know what? I feel like there's such a privilege in hearing people's stories, right? Like,
absolutely.
To have that space where folks are willing to tell you in a tough moment in their lives the things that are going on and what's happening for them, and to share that, it's really powerful. So that those conversations are often really rewarding ones, I think, in lots of ways.
Yeah.
And you hold them carefully, like and really respectfully when you do hear someone's story. It's because it takes a lot to be personal with someone and to be able to share. It
to
is.
have someone feel comfortable enough to share that with you and for you to be brought in.
Yeah, I think so too.
To that story.
But you can see already how, I think motivational interviews sometimes always sound so scientific. Like it's just motivational interviewing. But it really, I love how you put it into this context of going, well, a lot of us are probably doing it.
Yeah.
But I love the challenge of actually going, how can I do it better? Like, we can always be doing our best, but let's look at places where we can be better. Because I don't think communication is one of those things where you go, okay, I am good. I have ticked the box. Because you'll inevitably just run into a whole lot of trouble when you come across a situation. You go, there's no one situation that's the same as another. Like
and no one person that's the same as another.
That's right. That's right. So I can already see how, like, the weapons of influence, and I know I want to talk about that a bit more, how that really fits into just your conversation, your language, and being really intentional about that. Yeah.
And I love that there's, obviously a huge amount of evidence and science behind it, but actually taking it and applying it in your everyday practice is pretty straightforward. It's just having that kind of awareness to frame your conversations in a certain way and to take those really kind of simple but powerful guiding principles and incorporate them into what you're doing.
I'd encourage anyone who's interested and would like to know a bit more about it, just to jump online. It's one of those topics that's so widely talked about and studied. There are some really nice cheat sheets and kind of guides and so practical tips for people to try and employ those things in their sort of practice.
Can I just quickly go on a side tangent? Because I feel like we do that a lot with
Why
this.
not?
There's so many thoughts, right?
Yeah.
So I guess I have been so lucky. I've been able to travel, and I work a little bit in developing countries, and where their healthcare system is really just trying to get up to where it needs to be. So, and what I do notice in those settings is a very lab coat kind of like hierarchy where people come along and they'll just go, yes, doctor, whatever you say, doctor, and they'll just follow. And actually that was the reason why I did my PhDs. I just knew that to get any sort of influence there, I had to be respected, and just to be a physio wasn't enough. I had to have a title. Right. So I got my PhD. There's many other reasons, but that was like a big thing to kind of go, this is the way I can actually get into the system to then hopefully help to change.
They're leaning heavily on that authority
side of things, right? And I notice in terms of the differences, because I see them contrast quite heavily from what I do here in Perth, where we've learned so much about these techniques, and trying to instigate a lot of that in another country where it's just not a normal thing. And when you start asking questions like, so what would you like to do? They go, I don't know, you're the professional. Can you tell me what to do? And it's so fascinating to go back to that and go, oh, okay, how can we change that conversation so you're actually more empowered? Because what then happens is, I think you just become you become so dependent on someone to give you advice before you feel like you can take the next step. Whereas you can actually hold a lot of ownership. It's an interesting contrast. I feel like I had to.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it revolves largely around this really interesting cultural dimension that's called power distance. So there's some very kind of old and well developed and cited work by a researcher called Hofstede who developed the cultural dimensions that we understand different nations and preferences on, and this idea of power distance is is the extent to which we have those sort of hierarchies and operate within those. And in Australia, we don't. We know that we don't. And that sort of stuff almost turns our nose up. If we see somebody in a position of authority trying to tell us what to do, we're like, who are you? What are you? But in lots of other countries, and the countries that I know you work in, that's very strong. And so in an entirely benevolent way, it's important to use that platform, right? Because you have a position that, by default, because of cultural orientation, people will listen. Yeah. And so then, how great if you can then bring those rapport building and softer skills to that position as well, and not just use it for your own benefit as a platform and a mouthpiece and so on. So that's sort of the way that I think about those approaches. It may open the door. That cultural element may open the door to people listening to you, and then you've got to be delicate and sensitive with the way that you approach it. And in that specific situation of, I don't know, you tell me what I should do. I'd still try. And we talked about this last time I was on the podcast, actually. I'd still try a little bit of that autonomy support stuff. I'd still try a little bit of let's talk through some choices. And let's provide a bit of rationale for why these things might be a good idea and this thing might not work so well. So I'd still try and do a bit of that where I could, I think.
Easing
Which I
into
think
it.
you do for, families who've just, they've just received devastating news about a diagnosis. For the first time they're embarking on this journey. So they do go to a professional and go, help me. I don't know anything about this. Tell me what I need to do. And so there's a combination there of guidance, but also, yes, those elements come through as well, because there is the family dynamic. So you do, we do, it's not that power distance in that sort of way, but you just sort of, I guess, there is that element of it. When it's a new time experience and they just need help.
And you feel very overwhelmed and that you really don't know anything at that point.
That's
time.
right.
And there's the thing there's one of the key things to being a good clinician, right? Is that ability to take perspective, to put yourself into other people's shoes. Not just for a second or so to feel like you can rest easy when your head hits pillow that night, but to actually do it properly and to understand what's happening, because then you can understand the sorts of communications that they're going to benefit most from. I think.
I wanted to ask you again, probably on the authority weapon of influence. When in the way that we've talked about authority, it's that power hierarchy dynamic. But I wonder as well whether being an authority on a specific topic or something like that is encompassed in that weapon, for want of a better word.
Like, can you? Question.
We often think of that one in terms of like we do what our manager says. We listen to the Prime Minister because of the position that they're in. We'd hope. But no, that authority could come from other ways too. So some of those are much easier to see, and so some of those probably act much more quickly. If you would hope if a professor walks into a room full of undergraduate students, I know this not to be true, but if a professor walks into a room full of undergraduate students, they would listen because there's a professor in the room. Whereas other ones, the more sort of someone's knowledge or someone's expertise in an area might just take a little bit more time to come out, but you would hope that it would still have the same sort of effect.
It's interesting.
Because it could be I was thinking, how could that be positive? Because I think when I think about authority, you do in your head go, oh, negative. Like it could be someone just going, this is what you must do. And I think we've all got those experiences in a workplace where it's very, and then you have the micromanagement and you can have all those kinds of styles. But I guess if there's a position of authority in the sense of someone that's an expert and you just, it's kind of a little bit like us with you today. Like we know that you are an absolute expert in this area, and all captured on video here as you say it. But when you do say that and you know the literature behind it, I'm more likely to go, I actually trust what it is that you're saying because you're an authority in this area. I respect you, and I'm more willing to listen to you than I am to someone else on, so shall I say TikTok, who might be trying to tell me about, what they think is an effective communication tool.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like there is that really positive way about it. I think.
Could you tell that to my third year undergrad
Sure,
students?
I can.
And I haven't got my TikTok platform sorted yet, so I must get onto that.
And then I'm really interested in how it sometimes works the other way.
Okay, yeah.
And that person on TikTok proclaiming that they are an authority on something that they're not necessarily
that's
an
a good
authority
one. Yes.
on, or have the knowledge to back up what they're saying, but they say that they are. So is there any kind of weight to being able to demonstrate that you are actually an authority on something, or is it just enough to say that you are people will believe you?
This stuff really bothers me.
Yeah.
And this idea of just how easy it is to sell misinformation these days because of the way that everybody is able to have that platform. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should, not have free speech and not have all these amazing ways of connecting with one another.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult because those of us who care about doing things the right way and having evidence behind our messages, we take time to make sure we build that up. And then we don't often go shout from the rooftops about it.
We don't overstate it.
We just try to quietly do things the right way.
Yeah.
And I hope I'm in that category of people. I'm putting myself in that. I hope I am.
Of course.
And those who may have less desire to kind of work in that sense are often, there seems to be a correlation, those who are happiest to shout as loud as possible about it. And so what can we do about that? It's limited to an extent, and I hate saying that, but I think to an extent it's limited. We have to do our very best when we find ourselves in interactions with folks who may have been, I'll use the term, that's subjected to those sorts of claims. We just need to try and do our best to gently bring them back to reality, I guess, and evidence-based methods. And that isn't all, again, in line with the principles that we talked about in the motivational interviewing sense. The best way to do that isn't always to say, no, that person's wrong, even though we know that person's wrong. Because if we do that, we can set up, what we might consider sort of boomerang effects, and folks think, okay, well, you're just fighting your corner in the way that they're fighting their corner, and I heard that thing first, so I'll go back to that thing. So we need to be delicate with it, but it's a bother.
It is, and I suppose, in terms of things that you might be able to do in the very short term, you can lean on some of those nicer weapons of influence to try and get your message across, not reacting and not kind of just taking the opposite position, because you are likely to come up against some, defiance, I suppose. And
think of being a teenager. No, you will not do that. Yes, I will do that.
Yes, I will do that. Thank you very much. But if you have in the back of your mind that maintaining the relationship is the important thing, and then the relationship is the way for you to try and get your point of view across, maybe that's a better way to approach it.
Yeah.
It's the long game. Isn't it? It's a long game. When you look at, so to bring it back to TikTok again, only because of the influence. When we're talking about weapons and influence, we talk about influencers and how, a lot of these weapons are harnessed. I went on to TikTok the other day. Did you? Yeah, I was curious. And I looked up.
What's it like in there?
It is wild. It is wild. And I would say I was so distressed because I looked up, because it's important to know what our consumers, our families are actually seeing. And we think about the age demographic of what's actually there. If I'm not spending any time there, I don't know what they're seeing.
That's true.
And so I thought, okay, I'm gonna dive in. And I looked up some sort of, the non-evidence-based interventions that we have spoken about, which are really easy to search for because they are marketed that way. And it's such a shame. How do you look up evidence-based practice? You can't. It's like we can't fight against it. So I look into it and I'm like, they're experts on this. They're the emotional music they put on this. The testimonials that are just, just left unchecked, and it goes for, 15, 20 seconds. They say now the attention span to get people's attention is like 7 to 15 seconds. It's either one, whatever number it is, it's quick. And then when we want to build those relationships, and have those conversations, it's the long game. Yeah. So it feels like this this almost battleground that way to kind of try to balance the conversation and make sure we bring something there that so people can make an informed choice. But
and this will sound a little bit like an advert. So apologies if it does, but this is where institutions and institutes have a really important role to play to try and be that trusted voice. And that term is something that, we take really seriously at Telethon Kids Institute, which is, an institute that folks around WA and Australia will know, and internationally, I would hope. But big places like that carry weight. Yeah. And if those big places can shine a light on the evidence that their folks are developing, then that is kind of one of the ways that we can fight back, right? And places like where I'm also lucky to be at UWA, and places like that are just the same.
That's a really good point.
Yep, and that's where our affiliations, and I guess if you're looking someone up to see whether they are an expert, are they a lone ranger?
Just do your homework.
There's a little bit of that due diligence, isn't there? Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I really like that. So another thing that we often do see online is often like these messages about fear. And, like whether it's part of the scarcity, or like you're going to miss out, or if you don't do this, this will happen. The whole FOMO culture that we also do have as well. If I'm not doing this, what does that look like? There is science behind it. I know we don't have enough time to go into a lot of that, but I think it's just important to be able to identify that is sometimes used.
Absolutely, it is. And again, back to the book, we had a chapter by folks who've done a lot of work on this sort of what we often call fear appeal messaging. And to immediately contextualize that for folks, just think of cigarette packages. The reason that sometimes people try to scare folks into action, and typically they're trying to scare folks into healthy action, right? Which is where the context of what we're talking about today is relevant. Is because it can work under certain conditions. So to try to elicit that fear or that threat, people try to put together messages that indicate the severity of a problem and our susceptibility to it. Right. And so we've activated fear in somebody if they recognize that not doing something is a severe issue and that they are themselves susceptible to it, which is why those pictures of folks who've smoked their whole lives on cigarette packets is exactly that, right? What that can do, though, and we would hope that the sorts of folks who primarily listen to your podcast are not the ones who are using fear to motivate, right? No. But they'll see those messages, and let's be honest, they may inadvertently at times in their messaging evoke fear and threat by saying, "Hey, look, if we don't do this, if we're not able to complete this course of therapy, if this thing doesn't work as we hope, then X may happen, or then we may not achieve Y." There may be an element of inadvertently fear and threat that creeps in there. So it's important that we're mindful of that, because what can happen when we induce that, think of the smoking right images. Those people primarily continue to smoke despite seeing horrible pictures on smoking packs, right? Cigarette packs. So what we need to do is be mindful that when we elicit fear and threat, there's a good chance that people will just stick their head in the sand. Because it's too hard. And so instead of controlling what we consider controlling the danger that's present, they just control the fear that they've experienced and they run away from the fear. And we get no behavior change whatsoever, and people just are entrenched in what it is that we're trying to get them away from. So if we're ever looking at fear-based messages and understanding whether or not they can work, or if we're ever using them delicately, then we need to try and, at the same time as eliciting that fear-threat response, we need to try and build confidence. We have to try and build confidence that A, you can do the thing that will address the problem, and B, that if you do the thing, the outcomes will be positive. So yes, I can go and maintain this exercise program, and I also have been educated by my practitioner that exercise is good for me and will bring all these things. If we can start to develop those two things as well, and back to the smoking analogy, hey, you are able to quit. Here's all these tools that can help you quit, and quitting will reduce the severity, the susceptibility of all that threat. Then people are much more likely to follow through with what we want them to do.
It's quite a powerful thing when you think of all the things that we've seen. So I can imagine in a lot of the kids that we might work with, there are certain things that you might need to really encourage them to actually look into. For example, if a child's not swallowing properly, the chance of a chest infection is really high every time they're trying to eat. And so you really want them to go down the path of a peg.
Yeah.
Right.
But, they really want their children to eat with, they want to eat food with their family, which is a very fair point. So it's that messaging. And I've seen that time and time again where it takes a long time to get to that place because it's that resistance, that initially happens. But the health consequences are significant as well.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I mean, that's a really useful example to hear. And I can see how in talking with families about that kind of thing, there would easily be the path that elicits fear and threat, right? And so it's understanding that response when it comes, and how can we, if that's going to be there, how can we then put the support and the education and the processes around that to make sure that we can act on it?
Yes. Yeah. And I think, sorry, one more thing. There's so many things. I'm so sorry. But Ben, there was this one example of, I guess, a positive way of how we can turn fear around. Something we see a lot as well is where clinicians might say, look, if your child doesn't crawl, they won't walk. This is like a really big debate that often happens. And we need to recognize that obviously our children have neurological disorders. They won't do things in the same sequence. So I've seen a lot of therapists sort of go, okay, well, instead of just saying, if you're not going to crawl, if you don't crawl, you're going to walk. We'll just go, look, it may happen. We don't know when it might, but let's go ahead now and just look at another way that we can get them to walk. And we'll come back to crawling if that's going to happen in the child's own time. But it's not as important as we've been believing it to be. And it's trying to kind of underplay the things that drive that fear, because parents just want the best and they want their kids to make sure they follow the milestones and walk. But you can kind of turn that around. That's sort of how I've seen it being done in practice, of people kind of going, let's just turn that around. Is there anything else that we could do to help with that kind of thing? It's very emotive. Like, you're really tapping into something that's so important.
It's a good question. And I think it's a nice way of trying to encourage persistence and motivation without going to the scary messages. And the other thing that's really important there is that, there are folks who we'll speak to who will have what we often refer to as a fixed mindset, in that we tend to be born and develop these sort of ways of viewing the world that either we can change that thing through effort, that's a growth mindset, or we've got what we've got and we can't do much about it.
Right.
And that's an overly simplified. Folks vary on that, and maybe have a bit of both. But if we're speaking to those folks who have what we call that fixed mindset, who think that, well, we've got what we've got and we can't do much about it, and we provide messages that reinforce, well, hey, if there's no crawling, there's no walking, then the folks anchor to those sorts of things, and we may have even more detrimental effects on them. So I think that sort of rephrasing is a nice way of understanding that we're not sort of that fatalist kind of approach to the way that we think about things.
Yeah. And this might be overly simplistic, but just taking more of a strengths-based approach to your communication and to your practice, does that try and alleviate some of, I suppose, the fear message? Like, let's focus on what you can do and what you like doing, and and try to make that the key message, and the main focus.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're all trained, certainly in psych and in other areas, we're all trained to look for deficits and try and fix those, right? And look for gaps and plug the gaps. And there's a role for that, I'm sure. And motivational interviewing would talk about identifying those discrepancies and trying to work towards desired states in a productive way. But I do think that the building on strengths is something certainly in my experience early in a relationship, in a therapy or another kind of supporting relationship, that starting with those areas can build some confidence and build some success, such that folks are then a bit more amenable to maybe trying to work on the things that we might also need to look at in terms of wrong word, but deficits.
Yeah. Oh, it's really
think about.
Lots of food for thought. And I'm just coming back to what we were talking about in motivational interviewing, and identifying the change talk. Could we just briefly cover, I suppose, how you then go about supporting change? Because it's really easy to, well, not really easy.
How long have you got?
If you are a skilled motivational interviewer, you'll be able to work through and identify some of those things that people might want to change. But then changing is quite complex, right?
Yeah, we're not good at it.
No.
Almost none of us. And I speak from experience there. Lots of, I suppose, if we're trying to theme what we've talked about, at least in my simple understanding, which is always the way I think about things, a lot of what we've talked about is understanding how we might get folks ready to change, or we might get folks ready to embark on a process of therapy or a process of support and so on, some sort of behavioral intervention or strategy. The motivational interviewing, the weapons of persuasion, they're the groundwork that get people ready.
Sure.
Hopefully, open the door, so to speak. And then you've probably got to go walk through the door and actually engage in the thing. And those principles, if we've done them well, will provide some, motivational foundations and some relationship built foundations that can help you with that. But then there's a whole heap of practical, what we often call behavior change techniques that we, again, in a personalized and tailored way, need to wrap around those folks such that they can stick to the thing that we want them to stick to. There's often, with what we work on, there's often a dose-response relationship. And so we often want folks to come back and complete 6, 12, 8 weeks, however, months it might be forever. So there's an element of the scaffolding that needs to happen long after those initial conversations have happened. And there's an enormous science on behavior change. At last count, the last paper I read on this, there's an incredible professor in the UK at King's, King's or UCL, I forget, sorry, called Susan Michie, who is kind of the name in this area, and one of the last papers.
So much so that even I've heard of it.
There you go. And I cite her all the time. And I think I read a piece that had 93 of these behavior change techniques in way back. So there are
so we need
heaps
another
of them.
episode, I think, is what you're saying.
So, I'm not trying to say visit number 3. Maybe I am. But those sorts of things are, we provide social support, we provide prompts, we provide reminders, we provide fun, we provide the right environment, we understand barriers and try and eliminate those barriers. We regularly check in to understand where people's motivation is at, where their challenges are, and how we can differ. So there's so many of those ongoing skills and strategies that we need to try and support folks. And as I said, the most important thing for me in understanding that, because there's so many on the shelf, right? You could pick 80 or 90 of these things to try and support people's behavior, is to understand what they need. It might be that that person or that family really needs confidence building. And they need a text message reminder, otherwise they won't show up. So those are the things that we work on for that family. Whereas another family needs reinforcement and encouragement and sensitivity and other kinds of cues, plans detailed plans that can help them. And so we try and tailor or personalize the things that I think we would use there.
And I think what I take away from that is that it's, from a practical sense, it's not just having that conversation at the start, doing your set and forget program, coming back at the end and saying, oh, it didn't work. That's strange. Why is that? It's whatever conversations you're having at the start, continuing to have those conversations throughout the duration of your interaction with that person or that family, so that as challenges arise or, as the goalposts start to shift, you're a part of that and you can support them through that.
Absolutely. And, it's a nice chance to go back to the evidence-based stuff, right? If we're doing things right, we'll plan a bit, we'll do a bit, we'll evaluate a bit, and then we'll plan a bit more, and we'll do a bit more, and we'll evaluate a bit more, and we keep working that way.
So such a reflective thing for so many people. I know for myself, I think it's so wonderful to be able to think back and think of how you can really harness that throughout the whole journey.
Yeah.
I feel like we could talk to you forever.
And maybe we will get you to come back and talk about behaviour change a bit more.
I think that sounds like, there's 89, 90
Sure,
years.
I'm
Much to talk about. Yeah, sure.
I had to wait years for my real insights.
No, I think it's so important. But we're not done yet. Even though we do, we have gone a little bit longer, but we have a lot. Sorry, I did ask lots of questions, and anyway. But we do need to always finish with everyone's most absolutely favourite section of our podcast. Yep. It's called Tell It to Ed. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he has been listening. He puts the music on. He swishes things in and out to make sure he keeps us on time. Well, he tries to. But he has been listening in on the full conversation, and we don't give him much of a heads up saying he's got this segment, but we just told him just before. Ed, hello, welcome.
Hi.
Good to have you back on the show. Look, we are going to give Ben an opportunity to summarise this area of work in about 60 seconds. And you'll have time for a question. We didn't really prep you on that, but he's been to the show before.
That's
so
okay.
You're good. Yeah. Take it away.
I don't know that I'll need 60 seconds. Ooh. I would say that a lot of what we've talked about is good armour to understand how we can try to get people interested in the things that we're trying to promote, the interventions, the behaviours that we're trying to encourage. Some of those are nicer than others. And so I'd focus on the nice ones. And I would take the message away that it's really important to not just think problem and prescription, but to think person, conversation and understanding, I think, is key. And then again, to take that forward through into the programs that we run by way of supporting their behaviour change in a way that, again, is personable and fits that family.
That was great. Gosh, you did a good job. Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you.
Thanks.
Nailed it.
Didn't
that was
feel
very
it,
good.
But thank you. I like being put on the spot, though.
Sorry,
keep you on your toes.
Yeah, that's right. Ed, over to you.
Okay. So this conversation's been brilliant, just like the last time that we had Ben on the pod. And I'm furiously taking lots of great notes for how to improve my communication style. But I think I'm still trying to formulate my thoughts on a question. And so I think I'm going to go to the point that leads to communication. I haven't fully formulated this, so
that's fine.
Bear with me. I think we tend to interact with people out of like the overflow of our life, like your mental state, your emotional state, your personal circumstance, and then I guess that's really important. And then that skill in and of itself to kind of read that in others, that will hopefully lead to good communication styles and techniques that lead to change. So my question is, how important is the process or that life situation that kind of leads people to making the right kind of communication choices? I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say.
Ed, I could listen to you all day, by the way. I love that voice. I'll answer what may be useful, I think.
Sure.
But then tell me if I don't get it. The key for me in lots of what we've talked about, and I wish I'd just said this in my minute, is that I think, and I certainly wouldn't want to suggest here that I'm downplaying the incredible work and contributions that people who've worked in this area have made. But it's simple. I think it's simple in terms of understanding it. I would hope that nothing that we've talked about today is, so complex that people wouldn't understand. But the really difficult bit is the doing, right? It's not for me the knowing of this stuff. It's the doing of this stuff. And where the rubber hits the road is exactly where you just talked about, Ed. Like you're someone who is let's say a busy practitioner running a busy clinic with all of the mess that comes with that. And in this tornado that you're in day by day, a family walks through the door and you know all the things you should do and say, can you, in that moment, stop, clear the storm, sit down, and have the conversation in the way that you know you should and that you know is best for them.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. And that's why we sometimes screw up communication, isn't it? Because, often it's not that we just didn't know what to say. It's that we had whatever stuff was in our head or whatever stuff was in their head that was clouding what was going on. So the best way I know, and I get it wrong regularly, but the best way I know to try and address that is to keep exactly what I just talked about in mind. Oh, okay, spot. This is one of those opportunities.
Yeah.
Somebody here at a workplace or wherever it might be needs you right now, needs your best communication right now. So bring it.
Yeah.
That's my best way of trying to do it so that I keep an eye on exactly that kind of thing.
Keep it in check. It's good. It's a really good insight, Ed. Good question.
He's quiet, so he may not be satisfied with the response.
We've gone an hour and 5 minutes, but I think it's been an hour and 5 minutes of very, very good quality content. So we have to have him back.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I talk too much.
Maybe
that's my communication flaw.
No, well, I think it's a skill because you've made us all talk more. So it's collectively we have run slightly over what we would normally do, but I think
make it a two-parter, Ed.
Yeah.
Sure.
Lots of really useful things that all of us, no matter what we do, can take away and have a go at.
Yeah. My main take home is kind of like the responsibility element that you take upon yourself to be a good communicator. And I feel like Ed's question was kind of wrapped it all together. It's like, well, if you're going to do it, like, what are you going to do? Well,
and there will always be things going on.
You'll
always have some kind of a storm around you. You know how turbulent it is. Depends on the
capacity
day.
Could I just, if you, sorry, I know we've gone over time, but I just wanted to say a few thank you. Thank you to you for having me here, having me back again. It's wonderful to be able to get to this. So thank you. It's a real privilege. And I need to say a huge thank you to the folks who let me do the work that I so enjoy doing, Telethon Kids Institute and the University of Western Australia, and in particular the groups in the Psychology of Active Healthy Living group. The people there are the people who the students and the folks who we have there are wonderful. And I'm just the very, very, very fortunate one who gets to talk about a lot of that work. So I just want to, if I could say that.
No, you definitely can.
Thank you.
We'll keep that in.
Thank you.
We'll keep that in. Well, thank you so much once again for coming onto the show. As you can tell, we just love the conversation. I hope all of our listeners are enjoying it as much as we have as well. Remember, there's notes you can head to, so researchworks.net, and you have links to a lot of the work that Ben's doing too. So I really encourage you to have a look at that. And there's a CPD form there that you can fill out as well if you want to keep this as part of your PD requirements. But for now, we do need to say thank you.
We do. Thank you, Professor Ben Jackson.
My pleasure.
Prof, yes. And goodbye to everyone. We'll talk to you all again next time. Bye.
Bye.